In my previous videos, I have mentioned terms such as evaluation and assessment. However, today we will check the term testing. And to be more specific, we will check test validity. As you know, a test can provide us assessment. And in order to test a student's abilities, our test must be reliable and valid. First, need to be reliable, and then teacher can assess its validity. But if you don't understand nothing about this, don't worry. Let me explain you. As a whole, when we say that a test is reliable, it's because measure what it's supposed to measure. So in this case, you can apply the same test to a similar group of people with the same period of time, with similar circumstances, and it should have the same results, but only if your test is reliable. Then we talk about test validity, and this refers that how well measure what it's supposed to measure. Okay, so in this case, and the validity is a matter of degree. Okay, and test validity includes, of course, test validation. And this term refers to validating the use of the test in a specific context. For instance, tests for high school graduation, to college entrance, to enter a program, or test at university. Validity is part of the test since we develop it, okay? And to validate a test, first we need to decide which test and score will be valid. Maybe you are asking where test validity came from. And as everything, test validity has a history about how it showed up too. One of the earliest references about test validity was in 1928 with the psychologist Clark Holt. Then in 1937 with Garrett. Garrett said that validity is extent to which a test measures what it's proposed to measure. However, the first formal publication with information validity included was in 1954 handbook. In this book, authors decided to include 4 categories of test validity, and they are content, concurrent, predictive, and construct. However, a few years later, the American Psychological Association renamed the book to Handbook of Standards. And in this edition of the book, authors joined predictive and concurrent validity, and they reminded as criterion validity. They also suggest that to validate a test, it could be better use more than one approach. The next edition, that it was in 1974, they mentioned social consequences, and they also recommended that the content validity consider test taker behavior. As a result of the modification of information in the book, in the handbook, there are now 4 types of validity measure in any testing instrument. They are criterion validity, content validity, construct validity, and consequential validity. But what does it mean each of one application of the test validity? Well, the first one is content validity. And content validity deals with which test item sample to content area to be measured. For example, if your test is designed for a measure of to assess their students' knowledge in mathematics, you won't focus or you won't assess their knowledge in English. You need to focus only in their knowledge in mathematics. Content validity is normally determined by expert judgment, and however, assessment should still have a high correlation with other testing instruments that are supposed to sample the same content area. Okay? Content validity um, check how well questions align with the content or subject area that they are measured or they are assessed. Okay, and there are two other ways to establish the content validity, and they are face validity and curricular validity. The first one, face validity, is how a test or question on a test appear to measure what it's supposed to measure. And curricular validity refers refers that it matches the objectives of a specific curriculum is critical for assessment, that they are used for high stakes testing, for example high school exist or grade retention. Then we have criterion data, and this refers to if an assessment adequately predicts a student's behavior in a specific situation. As I told you before, criterion validity is a combination of two of the first categories that test validity has. There was concurrent validation and predictive validation. But what is validation? Okay, validation refers to procedures to determine how valid a predictor is. So in this case, in concurrent validation, the predictor and the criterion data are collected at around the same time. And concurrent validation is appropriate for diagnostic screening test, while predictive validation in predictive validation, the predictive scores are collected first, and then criteria data are collected at a later time. And in this case, the predictive validation is appropriate to assessment intended for assessed students' future status. In this case, an example can be the test for driving test. Okay. Criteria validation is accomplished by collecting both the assessment scores and information on the criterion for the same students. Okay, now construct validity means that if an assessment measure or not accurately a theoretical, not observable construct. And here is the question: our test it measure what it says it measure. For example, if you give a test to your student, a test of mathematics, and in your test there are long questions with long phrases, you are not assessing their knowledge in mathematics, you are testing their knowledge in English. Okay. There are two ways to determine a test construct validation. The first one is convergent divergent validation. The convergent is when a test has a high correlation with another test that measure the same construct. And divergent validation is when your test has a low correlation with another test that are assessment a different construct or measure a different construct. And the other way is factor analysis. And factor analysis is a statistical approach to determine construct validity. Okay, and finally, we have consequential validity. And this application refers to the social consequences of using a test for a particular situation. However, some experts think that social consequences are not appropriate part of validity. For example, they say that if a subgroup of students obtain low scores and then they have to take some courses to improve, and that doesn't mean that our assessment is invalid. And finally, we have consequential validity. And this application refers to the social consequences of using a test for a particular situation. However, some experts think that social consequences are not appropriate part of validity. For example, they say that if a subgroup of students obtain low scores and then they have to take some courses to improve, and that doesn't mean that our assessment is invalid. And to end the video, I would like to point out that a test, as you can see, is a very good tool to assess our students. However, you should remember that a test is not going to measure perfectly what knowledge our students have and have not. And to be very precise about our main topic, that was test validity, I think that this is the best way to for us as a teacher to realize how well our students are doing the thing, or how well they are learning. In our case, for example, how well they are learning English.